The crimson canopy of Viridia's jungle filtered the binary suns into dancing patches of amber light. As Tyrella moved silently through the undergrowth, her pale green skin provided perfect camouflage among the phosphorescent ferns, while her shock of red curly hair caught occasional glimmers of filtered sunlight. At 19 cycles old, she was the youngest scout in her pod, but her keen senses had already earned her respect among the Kyrillan. The metallic screech that had torn through the morning air still echoed in her mind. Something had fallen from the sky, something that didn't belong in their pristine world. Her elongated ears twitched at every sound as she approached the source, her two hands gripping her bioscanner and crystalline blade. With practiced ease, the crash site was awound. In the jungle floor, twisted metal jutted from scorched earth, and the acrid smell of burning plasteel made her nose wrinkle in disgust. But it was the symbols on the wreckage that made her blood run cold. Angular marks she recognized from the terror stories whispered around Kyrillan fires since childhood. Human. The word itself was a curse in her language. Flesh eaters, world burners, the devourers who consume everything in their path. A movement in the shadows made her freeze. Through the smoke and debris, a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, covered in scarred metal armor stained with dark fluid. The human male limped toward her, his face pale beneath streaks of what could only be blood. In his hand, he carried a weapon unlike anything in Kyrillan history, sleek, deadly, designed for killing. Their eyes met across 20 paces of devastation. Tyrella's breath caught in her throat. The human's eyes weren't the black voids of nightmare stories, but a startling blue, the color of Viridia's clearest streams. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then her instincts, honed by generations of survival and reinforced by countless warnings, screamed at her to run. She turned and fled. Branches whipped at her face as she crashed through the undergrowth, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, she could hear the human calling out in his harsh, guttural language, probably summoning his pack to hunt her down. The stories flashed through her mind. Humans who enslaved entire species, who stripped worlds bare and left nothing but ash and bone. She had to warn her people. The jungle shuddered. A sound like tearing metal mixed with organic rage rumbled from the canopy above. Tyrella skidded to a halt, looking up in horror as something immense descended through the branches. The venom lurker was easily twice the size of any Kyrillan, its 6 powerful limbs ending in razor-sharp talons, its maw dripping with paralytic toxin that could fell a full-grown beast. In seconds, she'd stumbled into its territory while fleeing the human, the creature's compound eyes fixed on her, and she saw her death reflected 100 times over. Her legs locked with terror as the predator gathered itself to pounce. This was how she would die, not as a warrior defending her people, but as prey that had run blindly into a trap. The venom lurker launched itself from the branches. A blur of motion struck at midair, not Tyrella, but the human. Sergeant Dex Thorne collided with the massive predator, his damaged weapon sparking as he drove it into the creature's flank. They crashed to the jungle floor in a tangle of limbs and fury, rolling through the phosphorescent moss as they fought. Tyrella could only stare in shock. The human, the supposed monster she'd fled from, was fighting for her life. His weapon had broken on impact, leaving him with nothing but his bare hands and what appeared to be a vibro knife barely longer than her palm. The venom lurker outweighed him 3-to-1, its natural armor deflecting most of his strikes. But he didn't retreat, even as the creature's claws opened long gashes in his arms. Even as its tail lashed across his ribs with audible cracks, Dex kept fighting. He moved with desperate precision, striking at joints and sensory organs, using his smaller size to stay mobile. "Run," he shouted in broken Kyrillan, the word mangled by his human vocal cords, but unmistakably clear. "Go, run." The venom lurker's tail caught him across the chest, sending him sprawling. The creature reared up for a killing blow, toxin dripping from its extended fangs. Tyrella saw the human try to rise, saw the dark stain spreading across his armor, saw him fall back with a grunt of pain. He was going to die. This human who had thrown himself between her and certain death was about to be torn apart by one of Viridia's apex predators. Her crystalline blade sang as she drew it, its edge gleaming with bioluminescent energy. The venom lurker's attention snapped to her as she stepped into the clearing, and she saw something she'd never expected to see in a human's eyes as Dex looked up at her. Gratitude. The creature pivoted toward this new threat, but Tyrella had the advantage of surprise and intimate knowledge of venom lurker anatomy. Her blade found the gap between its head and thorax in a single, fluid strike. The predator convulsed once and collapsed, its massive form shuddering into stillness. In the sudden quiet of the jungle, broken only by the distant calls of songbirds and the human's labored breathing, Tyrella stood over the corpse of her childhood nightmares, both the venom lurker and everything she'd been taught about the species now lying wounded at her feet. Dex Thorne looked up at her with those impossible blue eyes and smiled smiled despite the pain written across his features. "Thank you," he whispered in heavily accented Krell and dot, and in that moment, everything Tyrella thought she knew about the universe began to crumble. The cave Tyrella chose was barely large enough for two, hidden behind a curtain of luminescent weeping vines that would mask their presence. From both predators and search parties, she'd half carried, half dragged the unconscious human through nearly a mile of jungle, her slight frame trembling with exhaustion by the time she finally lowered him onto the soft moss floor. Now, as the twin suns set beyond the cave mouth, she knelt beside Dex's still form and wondered what madness had possessed her. Every rational thought screamed that she should have left him to die, should have fled back to her settlement to warn the Council of Elders. Instead, she found herself carefully removing his damaged armor, piece by piece, her hands shaking as she revealed the extent of his injuries. The venom lurker's claws had carved deep furrows across his chest and arms. His left shoulder was clearly dislocated, and she could see the purple-black bruising where the creature's tail had struck his ribs. But it was the older scars that made her pause, dozens of them, marking his pale skin like a map of violence. What kind of life created such wounds? Tyrella gathered healing moss and pain root from the cave walls, her grandmother's teachings guiding her hands as she prepared the medicinal paste. The irony wasn't lost on her using sacred Kyrillan healing arts to save a member of the species that supposedly wanted to destroy them all. When she pressed the first handful of moss against his wounds, Dex's eyes snapped open. His hand moved toward his weapon with trained reflex before he registered where he was. Who was tending him? Those impossible blue eyes found hers in the cave's dim phosphorescent glow. "You," he began in his rough Kyrillan, then winced as the movement pulled at his injuries. You saved me first," Tyrella replied, surprised by her own boldness. She'd never spoken directly to an alien before, let alone a human. Why? Dex was quiet for a long moment as she worked, applying the healing moss to each wound. With gentle precision, when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd expected from a supposed monster. "Because you were afraid. Because something was trying to hurt you." He paused, studying her face. "Because it was the right thing to do. But I'm not your species. Your people. They say you only protect your own kind." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Your people say a lot of things about humans, I'm guessing. Just like my people say things about yours." Tyrella's hands stilled on his chest. "What do they say? That Kyrillans are primitive, that you're barely more than animals, hiding in trees and worshipping plants." His eyes met hers again. "But you're not primitive. Are you? You knew exactly how to treat these wounds. You understood the venom lurker's anatomy well enough to kill it with one strike." Heat flushed through her pale green cheeks. "The Council teaches that humans see all other species as food sources, as things to be consumed or enslaved. Some humans, maybe," Dex admitted, his voice heavy with something that might have been shame, "but not all of us. Just like I'm guessing not all Kyrillans would risk their lives to save a wounded stranger." She resumed her work in silence, processing his words. The healing moss was beginning to take effect, sealing the worst of his wounds and drawing out the toxins. Her fingers traced the edge of a particularly deep scar on his shoulder, old, long healed, but still raised against his skin. "Where did this come from?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Defending a colony world from raiders. Human raiders," he added quietly. "I've spent most of my career protecting civilians from my own species. Funny how the universe works, isn't it? Tyrella looked up at him, searching his face for deception. But there was only pain there, not just physical, but something deeper. The weight of choices made, of battles fought, of a life spent fighting monsters that wore his own face. "I don't understand," she whispered. "If humans fight each other, if you protect other species, why are we taught to fear you?" "Because fear is easier than understanding," Dex said, his hand moving to cover hers where it rested on his chest. His skin was warm, warmer than any Chirelan's, and she was startled by how right it felt. "Because somewhere in your people's history, bad humans did bad things, and somewhere in our history, your people probably did things that scared us too." The touch of his hand on hers sent unfamiliar sensations racing through her nervous system. She should pull away, should maintain proper distance from this alien being. Instead, she found herself leaning closer, studying the strange patterns of his irises, the way his breathing had steadied under her care. "Are you a bad human, Dex Thorne?" she asked, using his name for the first time. "I try not to be," he replied. "But I've done things I'm not proud of, killed when I should have, found another way, failed to save people I was supposed to protect." His thumb traced gently across her knuckles. "What about you, Tyrella? Are you a good Chirelan?" She started at the sound of her name in his voice. She'd never told him what she was called, but somehow he'd learned it, probably from her panicked flight through the jungle, when she'd been calling on the spirits of her ancestors for protection. "I'm supposed to be," she said. "I'm supposed to report alien contact to the council immediately. I'm supposed to put my people's safety above all else." She looked down at their joined hands. "I'm supposed to let wounded enemies die rather than risk discovery. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." She met his eyes again. "I don't know what that makes me. Human, maybe," Dex said with a small smile. In the best sense of the word. Outside the cave, the jungle's night chorus was beginning, the haunting calls of dream singers and the rustling of nocturnal creatures in the canopy. But inside their small sanctuary, lit only by the soft glow of bioluminescent moss, two beings from different worlds sat in comfortable silence, each beginning to see the other not as a monster from childhood stories, but as something infinitely more complex and precious, a person capable of both cruelty and kindness, someone worth saving, someone worth knowing. 3 days passed in their hidden sanctuary. 3 days that reshaped everything Tyrella thought she knew about the universe. Dex's wounds healed with remarkable speed, aided by her careful ministrations and what she was beginning to recognize as an impressive human constitution. But more than his body was recovering, barriers built by centuries of mutual fear were crumbling with each shared conversation. "Your people really worship the trees?" Dex asked on the second morning, watching Tyrella perform her daily communion with the ancient spirit oak that grew beside their cave. Its massive trunk pulsed with soft blue light, responding to her touch with patterns that seemed almost like language. "Not worship exactly," she explained, settling beside him on the moss-covered stone where he'd taken to sitting during her rituals. "We believe all life is connected. The trees are our eldest siblings, our guides. They've seen centuries pass, witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. When we touch them, we can sometimes sense echoes of that wisdom," she demonstrated, placing her palm against the oak's bark. The tree's bioluminescence shifted from blue to warm gold, and for a moment, the cave filled with the sound of whispered voices, not words, but emotions. Peace, welcome, ancient joy at the presence of new life. Dex's eyes widened. They're alive, really alive, not just growing. Everything is alive, Tyrella said softly. Your people haven't lost that connection. Some have, he admitted. Earth's cities are mostly metal and stone now, but there are places, forests on New Geneva, the coral gardens of Aquatica Prime, places where you can still feel what you're talking about. He looked at her with something approaching wonder. My grandmother had a garden. She used to say the plants talked to her. Everyone thought she was just a crazy old woman. Maybe she wasn't crazy. Maybe she just remembered what your people used to know. The conversation drifted from philosophy to more personal matters. Tyrella learned that Dex had been part of a diplomatic mission, that the crash had been caused by engine failure rather than enemy action. He'd been carrying medical supplies to a mining colony. When the ship's drive core had overloaded, medical Supplies? She asked, surprised. Vaccines, mostly. The miners are mostly human. But there are Galaxy families there too. Their children were getting sick from something in the local water supply. He pulled a small container from his salvaged gear. These should help, if I can get them to the colony in time. Tirella examined the container, noting the multi-species labeling and the biohazard seals that indicated sophisticated medicine. You were risking your life to help alien children. They're just children, Dex said simply. Doesn't matter what species they are. That afternoon, he asked about her own life. She found herself describing the scout training, the long months, learning to read jungle signs and navigate by the stars. She told him about her younger brother, Kes, who dreamed of becoming a bioengineer, and her parents, who ran a small settlement on the far side of the continent. They'll be worried, she admitted. I was supposed to return 3 days ago. I'm sorry, Dex said, and she could hear the genuine regret in his voice. Because of helping me. You're putting yourself at risk. Yes, she said simply, but I would do it again. Their eyes met across the small space between them, and Tirella felt that strange racing of her heart that seemed to happen whenever he looked at her directly. Over the past days, she'd found herself noticing things about him that had nothing to do with his supposed monstrosity. The way he moved with careful grace despite his size, the gentleness of his hands when he helped her gather medicinal plants, the sound of his laugh when she told him about Kess's latest invention, a failed attempt at a flying bicycle that had ended with her brother stuck in a thorn bush for half a day. Can I ask you something? Dex said, his voice softer than usual. Of course. What do you see when you look at me? Not what you were taught to see, but what you actually see. Tirella considered the question seriously. What did she see? Not the monster from childhood stories, certainly. Not the flesh-eating demon that had haunted her nightmares. I see someone who's been hurt, she said finally. Someone who's seen too much violence, but hasn't let it make him cruel. I see kindness, even when you think you're being watched. Intelligence, sadness, sometimes when you think I'm not looking. She paused, gathering courage. I see someone I wish I'd met under different circumstances. What kind of circumstances? Ones where I wouldn't have to choose between knowing you and protecting my people. Dex was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she'd never heard before. What if you didn't have to choose? What if there was a way for our people to meet without fear? Is that possible? I don't know, but maybe. Maybe individuals can build bridges that governments can't. Maybe understanding starts with two people willing to see past their fears. That evening, as they shared a meal of jungle fruits and the protein bars from Dex's emergency supplies, Tirella found herself studying his face in the firelight. When had she stopped seeing him as alien? When had his features become familiar, even attractive in their strangeness? Your hair, he said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. It's beautiful, like fire caught in sunlight. Heat rushed through her cheeks, and she touched her curls self-consciously. It's too bright. Other Chirolans have more subtle coloring. Don't change it, he said firmly. It suits you. Bold, unafraid to stand out. I am afraid, though, all the time. Afraid of making the wrong choice, of disappointing my people, of... She trailed off, unable to voice the growing fear that seemed to expand in her chest whenever she thought about him. Leaving? Of what? Of caring too much about someone I can never really have. The words hung between them like a confession, more honest than she'd intended to be. Dex set down his food and moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Tirella, he said softly, what we have here right now, no one can take that away. Whatever happens, when we leave this place, we'll always have these days, these conversations, this connection. Is that enough? I don't know, he admitted, but it's more than I ever expected to have. When he reached up to touch her face, tracing the delicate bone structure around her eyes with gentle fingers, she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into the touch, marveling at how right it felt to be close to him. Tomorrow, they would have to face the world outside their sanctuary. Tonight, though, they had each other and the growing certainty that some connections transcend the boundaries of species, fear, and expectation. The storm that struck on their fourth night changed everything. Tyrell woke to the sound of thunder splitting the sky and rain hammering against the cave entrance. With violent intensity, the twin moons were hidden behind roiling clouds, and the jungle's usual night sounds had been swallowed by the tempest's fury. Beside her, Dex was already awake, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon at the first crash of lightning. "Seasonal storm," she explained, having to raise her voice above the wind. "They can last for days. Will we be safe here?" Before she could answer, a tremendous crack echoed through the cave as something large struck the cliff face above them. Rocks tumbled past the entrance, and she felt Dex's arm come around her shoulders, pulling her against his side as debris scattered across their small sanctuary. "The cave should hold," she said, but her voice carried uncertainty. The storm was more violent than any she'd experienced, and the ancient rock formations of this region were known to shift during severe weather. Another lightning strike illuminated the cave in stark white light, and she saw the concern in Dex's eyes. Not for himself, she was beginning to understand that his first instinct was always to protect others, but for her safety. "If the cave collapses," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear, "there's an overhang about 50 meters north. We could make a run for it. In this storm, the lightning cats hunt during weather like this. They use the electrical discharge to disorient their prey." She shook her head. "We're safer here. Together." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, carrying weight beyond its simple meaning. They'd been together for days now, but this felt different, more intimate. The storm had stripped away their careful politeness, their tentative distance, leaving only the raw truth of their connection. Another rumble of thunder, closer this time, and Tyrell found herself pressing closer to Dex's warmth. His arm tightened around her, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek. When had touching him become so natural? When had his embrace started feeling like home? "Tell me about Earth," she said, needing distraction from the growing awareness of his closeness. "About your world before the colonies. Earth is complicated," he said, his voice a low rumble that she felt as much as heard. "Beautiful in places, scarred in others. We nearly destroyed it before we learned to reach for the stars. But there are still places that take your breath away. Oceans that stretch beyond the horizon, mountains that pierce the clouds, forests older than recorded history." His free hand gestured in the dim light, painting pictures with words. "There's a place called the Northern Lights, where the sky dances with colors that have no names, and rain forests that make your jungle look. Tame trees so tall you can't see their tops, filled with creatures that seem more like dreams than reality." "It sounds beautiful," Tyrell murmured, "and frightening. Like here," he said, looking down at her. "Like you." The storm chose that moment to unleash its full fury. Lightning struck so close that the cave filled with the smell of ozone, and the thunder that followed was deafening. The ground shook, and Tyrell felt loose stones rain down from the ceiling above. Instinctively, she buried her face against Dex's chest as he covered her with his body, shielding her from the falling debris. They stayed like that for long moments, wrapped around each other while the storm raged outside. When the immediate danger passed, neither of them moved apart. "Tyrell," Dex said softly, his voice rough with something that wasn't entirely fear. She looked up at him, seeing her own conflicted emotions reflected in his eyes. The careful boundaries they'd maintained were crumbling like the rocks outside. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing the delicate ridge of her cheekbone. "We shouldn't," she whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "I know," he replied, but his other arm pulled her closer. "Our people would never understand, never accept it. It's impossible," she agreed, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Completely impossible," he confirmed, and then his lips found hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both still convinced this was a dream that would shatter at any moment. But when Tyrell's arms came up around his neck, when she pressed closer with a soft sound of surrender, gentleness gave way to something deeper. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, moving against hers with a reverence that made her heart race. She'd never been kissed before. Kyrillan courtship rituals were formal, ceremonial affairs that bore no resemblance to this intimate sharing of breath and sensation. When his tongue brushed lightly against her lower lip, she gasped. and he took the opportunity to deepen the kiss. The storm outside seemed to mirror the tempest building between them. Every crash of thunder sent vibrations through the cave floor, through their bodies pressed together on the soft moss. Lightning painted everything in stark relief as hands tangled in her red curls, her pale green skin luminous in the brief flashes of light. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Dex rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if in pain. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "I know." Her hands were still fisted in his shirt, reluctant to let him go. "Dex, I don't," he said, his voice pained. "Don't say it, because if you do, I'll never be able to let you go." But she said it anyway, the words torn from her heart by something stronger than wisdom or caution. "I love you." The silence that followed was broken only by the storm's fury. When Dex opened his eyes, she saw her own anguish reflected there, the impossible situation they'd created, the choice between love and loyalty that neither of them was prepared to make. "I love you too," he whispered, and the admission seemed to break something in both of them. They came together again, more desperately this time, as if they could somehow merge into one being and escape the cruel realities that awaited them. Beyond the cave, his hands roamed her back, memorizing the feel of her through the thin fabric of her scout uniform. Her fingers traced the scars on his chest, each mark a story she wanted to know, a piece of his history she longed to share. When they finally lay together on the soft moss, her head pillowed on his shoulder while the storm gradually exhausted itself outside, both knew that everything had changed. They'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, made a choice that would haunt them regardless of what the future held. "What happens now?" Tyrella asked, her voice small in the darkness. "I don't know," Dex admitted, his fingers combing gently through her hair. "But whatever happens, I want you to know these have been the best days of my life." She pressed a kiss to his chest, tasting salt and something uniquely him. "Mine too," outside. The storm was finally beginning to break, but neither of them slept. They lay awake in each other's arms, watching the lightning grow more distant, both knowing that dawn would bring decisions neither was ready to face. The rescue beacons began their haunting songs at dawn. Tyrella woke to the sound of low, harmonic thrumming that seemed to resonate through her bones. Beside her, Dex stirred, his arm tightening around her waist as consciousness returned. The morning light filtering through the cave entrance revealed what they'd both been dreading, the geometric patterns of Kyrillan search drones dancing across the sky, while the angular silhouettes of human rescue craft moved in formation on the distant horizon. "They found us," she whispered, the words feeling like a death sentence. Dex sat up slowly, his military training overriding the desire to hold her close for just a few more moments. "Both of our peoples, they must have been tracking us for days." The reality of their situation crashed over them with brutal clarity. In hours, perhaps minutes, they would be separated by light years and centuries of mistrust. The love they'd discovered in their hidden sanctuary would become nothing more than a memory, treasured but ultimately futile. "I have to go back," Tyrella said, though every word felt like tearing away a piece of her soul. "My people will be terrified. If they see me with you, they'll think I corrupted you, captured you." Dex's jaw tightened. "I know." The search drones were getting closer, their harmonic calls growing more insistent. Soon, they would detect her biosignature and converge on the cave. She needed to move, to put distance between herself and Dex before the rescue teams arrived. But as she started to rise, his hand caught hers. "Tyrella, wait." His voice was rough with emotion. "Before you go, before we pretend this never happened, I need you to know something." She looked down at him, memorizing every detail of his face in the morning light. The way his hair caught the golden rays filtering through the cave mouth, the intensity in those impossible blue eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow that she'd traced with her fingers in the darkness. "What? This wasn't just survival instinct or proximity. What I feel for you, it's real. It's the most real thing I've ever experienced." He stood, still holding her hand, and she could see the soldier's discipline warring with the man's desperate need to hold onto what they'd found, if there was any way, any possibility of a future where we could be together. "There isn't," she said, though the words felt like poison on her tongue. You know there isn't. Not now. But maybe someday. Maybe if enough people from both our worlds could see past the fear, could recognize that connection is possible. The drones were close enough now that she could make out individual search patterns. Her own people would be here within minutes, and if they found her with a human, everything she'd worked for as a scout would be destroyed. Worse, they might see Dex as a threat, might attack first and ask questions later. I have to go, she said, pulling her hand free despite every instinct screaming at her to stay, now. But as she reached the cave entrance, she turned back one last time. Dex was standing in the dim light, his expression a mixture of love and loss that she knew would haunt her for the rest of her life. Dex, she said, her voice breaking, if things were different, they will be, he said with sudden certainty. Maybe not today, maybe not in our lifetimes, but someday, Tirella. Someday the people like us won't have to choose between love and loyalty. The first search drone crested the ridge above their cave, its sensors sweeping the area. Tirella forced herself to turn away, to run through the jungle toward the distant sound of Kyrillan rescue teams, leaving behind the only person who had ever seen her completely and loved what they found. An hour later, she was surrounded by her own people, scouts, medics, even a council elder who had come personally to oversee her rescue. They peppered her with questions. Where had she been? What had caused her disappearance? Had she encountered any threats? I was trapped by the storm, she said, the lies flowing more easily than she'd expected. Took shelter in a cave system. The interference from the electrical activity must have blocked my beacon. It was plausible. The elder examined her for signs of harm, found none. And gradually the tension in the rescue party eased. As they prepared to depart, Tirella caught sight of the human rescue craft in the distance, already beginning their own extraction. Eldervan, she said carefully, the human crash site I reported, have you investigated it? Briefly, the wreckage was empty. Either the occupant died and the body was consumed by scavengers, or they managed to escape into the deep jungle. The elder's expression was grim. Either way, they pose no further threat. No threat. Tirella thought, remembering Dex's gentle hands and protective instincts. If only you knew. The journey back to the settlement took 2 hours, and with every mile that passed, Tirella felt a piece of her heart being left behind. But as they approached the familiar bioluminescent spires of her home, she made a decision that surprised even her. Eldervan, she said, I want to petition the council for an assignment to the Outer Territories. The Outer Territories? The elder looked puzzled. That's diplomatic work, child. Monitoring the neutral zones, maintaining the early warning systems. Why would a scout want such a posting? Because someone needs to watch for changes. Tirella said carefully, if the stories about humans are true, if they really are expanding their territory, we need scouts who understand them, who can read their intentions. It wasn't entirely a lie. The Outer Territories were where first contact protocols would be established. If the two species ever decided to attempt formal relations, if Dex was right, if change was possible, it would begin there. The elder considered her request. It's dangerous work. Lonely, you'd be stationed on the edge of known space for years at a time. I understand. Very well. I'll present your petition to the council. That night, alone in her quarters for the first time in over a week, Tirella stood at her window watching the stars. Somewhere out there, Dex was probably doing the same thing, both of them wondering if they'd ever see each other again. But as she touched the small device she'd hidden in her pack, a human communication beacon that Dex had given her in those final moments, keyed to a frequency that would work across interstellar distances, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe he was right. Maybe someday, people like them wouldn't have to choose between love and loyalty. Maybe they could be the bridge between worlds, the proof that understanding was possible. And maybe, just maybe, their love story wasn't ending, it was just beginning. 3 months later, Scout Tirella received her assignment to monitoring Station Epsilon, on the edge of human space. Her first transmission from the Outer Territories was a standard report on local conditions and early warning system status. Her second transmission, sent on a different frequency entirely, was much shorter. I'm here. I'm waiting. I love you. The Reply came 6 hours later. I love you too. On my way. Some connections, it seemed, really could transcend the boundaries of species, fear, and expectation. And sometimes, love was strong enough to build bridges across the stars.